The night my ex-wife came back, my daughter looked at the doorbell camera and asked me why a stranger was crying outside our house. That question did more damage than any apology Melissa Carter could have offered, because Grace was 5 years old enough to know Santa's handwriting was mine, old enough to measure flour for Christmas cookies, old enough to remember the names of every stuffed animal in her room, but not old enough to recognize the woman who had given birth to her. Snow was falling hard over our street in Columbus, the kind of thick Ohio snow that turns porch lights into blurry halos and makes every house look softer than it really is. Inside, our living room was warm. The fireplace clicked quietly behind the glass. Cinnamon and pine hung in the air. Grace had left one pink slipper under the tree and one on the couch, because that was how she moved through life, like the whole world was safe enough to leave pieces of herself everywhere. I was kneeling beside a half-wrapped dollhouse when the doorbell rang. Not a friendly ring. Not the kind a neighbor gives when they are dropping off cookies. It was slow, desperate, spaced out like the person outside had to gather courage between each press. I glanced at the clock on the mantel. 9:47 p.m., Christmas Eve. Nobody came by that late unless they were lost, drunk, or carrying a past they could no longer afford. I opened the camera feed on my phone, and for a second, my hand forgot how to move. Melissa stood at the end of the porch, wrapped in a thin beige coat that looked expensive once and useless now. Her hair was damp from the snow. Mascara had made dark tracks under her eyes. One hand gripped the handle of a rolling suitcase. The other clutched her phone like it was the last solid thing in her life. She leaned toward the speaker, and her voice came through small and broken. "Daniel, please. I have nowhere else to go. 5 years can change a man's face, his bank account, his address, even the way he sleeps at night. But some voices don't age. They just unlock rooms you thought you had sealed shut." Behind me, Grace padded in wearing her red Christmas pajamas, hair messy from the couch, cheeks warm from sleep. She climbed onto the arm of my recliner and looked at the screen over my shoulder. "Daddy," she whispered, "who is that lady?" I did not answer right away. I watched Melissa wipe her cheek with the back of her hand, the same hand that had once slid a wedding ring across our kitchen table like it was a receipt she no longer needed. The snow blew sideways across the porch, and for one terrible second, the years folded in on themselves. I was back in the old house, standing under cheap Christmas lights, holding a baby blanket she had left behind. I remembered the smell of cold coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the envelope on the table, and the sentence that split my life cleanly into before and after. I wasn't made to be poor. Grace tugged my sleeve. "Daddy." Her voice brought me back. My daughter was not a memory. She was real, warm, breathing, waiting for me to make the kind of choice a father makes when the past knocks during bedtime. I set the phone down carefully, like it was something sharp. I did not run to the door. I did not curse Melissa's name. I did not let Grace see the storm that had started moving behind my ribs. I simply picked my daughter up, carried her away from the window, and told her, "Go sit by the tree, sweetheart. I need to talk to someone." She nodded, trusting me completely, and that trust was heavier than any anger I had left. When I reached the front door, I placed my hand on the knob and stood there for a breath. Outside was the woman who had abandoned us. Inside was the family she had forced me to build without her. And between the two was one locked door, warm on my side, freezing on hers. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed, and the cold slipped in first, sharp and clean, carrying snowflakes across the hardwood like tiny pieces of the night. Melissa looked smaller than she had on the screen. 5 years ago, she had known exactly how to stand, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes steady enough to make leaving look like a promotion. Now she stood under my porch light with wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her suitcase tilted beside her, and a silence between us wide enough to bury a marriage in. "Daniel," she said again, softer this time, as if my name was a key she hoped still worked. I looked past her to the driveway, half expecting to see the black SUV, the polished headlights, the man who had smiled from behind the wheel while my life came apart. But there was no SUV now, no confident engine waiting by the curb, no expensive coat draped over her shoulders. Just Melissa, the snow, and the kind of loneliness that arrives after pride has spent everything else. I kept my voice even. "Grace is awake." That sentence did what anger never could. It stopped her cold. Her eyes flicked toward the warm glow behind me, toward the Christmas tree, toward the home she had never helped build. "Can I see her?" she asked. The question landed wrong. Not because it was cruel, but because it sounded too easy, like asking to borrow sugar from a neighbor. I stared at her through the narrow opening and saw another Christmas Eve, 5 years earlier, when I still believed a man could hold a family together if he just worked enough hours, paid enough bills, swallowed enough fear, and kept promising that things would get better. Back then, we lived in a rented 2-bedroom house on the west side of Columbus, close enough to the highway that passing trucks made the windows tremble at night. The furnace coughed more than it heated. The kitchen floor curled at the corners. Half the outlets only worked if you pushed the plug in at an angle. I was 34, running service calls for an electrical contractor, crawling through attics in July, fixing breaker panels in freezing garages in December, coming home with cracked hands and a paycheck that never stretched as far as hope did. Melissa was 31, beautiful in a way that made people turn twice, and pregnant with our first child. I thought the baby would soften the hard edges between us. I thought a nursery, a crib, a tiny pair of socks would remind her that poor was not permanent, that tired was not failure, that a family could start small and still become something solid. I was wrong. That afternoon, I had worked a 10-hour emergency call at a grocery store where a freezer line had taken down half the building. The manager paid cash for the overtime, and I remember folding those bills into my glove compartment like they were a miracle. I stopped at a drugstore on the way home and bought a little white blanket with silver stars on it, 2 candy canes, and a cheap ornament shaped like a rocking horse. It was all I could afford after rent, utilities, and the doctor bill sitting unopened on our counter. But I drove home smiling. Snow tapped against the windshield. The radio played old Christmas songs. For 15 minutes, I let myself believe that love could fill the gap money left behind. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the tree. Not peaceful dark. Empty dark. The kind of dark that makes your hand slow down before it reaches the door. Inside, the heat was off. The living room smelled like pine needles and cold coffee. 2 stockings hung over the mantel, mine and hers, because we had not bought one for the baby yet. On the kitchen table was a manila envelope, her wedding ring, and the rocking chair brochure she had circled in red 3 weeks earlier. I stood there with the blanket tucked under my arm, listening for her footsteps, her voice, anything. Then I saw the note. 1 page. 6 sentences. Neat handwriting. No tear stains. No hesitation in the ink. She said she could not do this anymore. She said she was tired of being brave for a future that kept moving farther away. She said Brandon understood what kind of life she deserved. And at the bottom, the line that found a permanent place under my skin, I was not made to be poor. I read that line 3 times before my body understood what my eyes had already accepted. The kitchen light buzzed over my head. The little silver star blanket slid halfway out of the drugstore bag and rested against my boot. Somewhere outside, a car door closed, clean and final. I moved to the window without thinking, not fast, not dramatic, just pulled forward by the sound of my life leaving the driveway. Through the frost on the glass, I saw Melissa standing under the crooked strand of Christmas lights I had hung the week before. She wore the cream wool coat her mother had bought. The one she said made her feel like she still belonged somewhere better. Her suitcase stood upright beside her. One hand rested on her stomach, protective and distant at the same time. Across the street, a black Cadillac Escalade idled at the curb, its headlights cutting through the snowfall like 2 white blades. Brandon Whitmore sat behind the wheel. I had met him twice. Once at a real estate open house where Melissa dragged me on a Sunday afternoon just to look at kitchens we could not afford, and once at a holiday fundraiser where he shook my hand without ever really looking at me. He was the kind of man who smelled like expensive leather and talked in square footage, the kind who could say the word opportunity and make people lean closer. That night, he did not get out of the vehicle. He did not need to. He just waited with the engine running, confident the ending had already been purchased. I opened the front door, and the cold hit my face so hard my eyes watered. Melissa had turned before I said her name. For 1 second, I searched her face for doubt. I wanted to see one crack, one flicker, one sign that this was a mistake happening too quickly to stop. There was nothing. Her expression was calm in the worst possible way. "Melissa," I said, and my voice sounded small against the snow. She looked at the bag in my hand, at the cheap blanket, at the candy canes sticking out of the top, and something like pity crossed her face. Pity was worse than anger. Anger would have meant I still mattered enough to disturb her. "Daniel, do not make this harder," she said. I remember how gently she said it, like she was the reasonable one, like I was standing in the way of her rescue. I asked about the baby. That was all I could manage. 2 words, barely held together. "The baby." Her hand tightened over her coat. "I need stability," she said. "Real stability. Not promises. Not overtime. Not another year of hoping things change." Snow gathered on her hair while she explained my life to me in sentences that sounded rehearsed. She said Brandon had connections. She said he could help her start over. She said a child deserved more than a father who came home exhausted and counted dollars at the kitchen table. I looked past her at the Escalade and saw Brandon watching us in the rearview mirror, his face half lit by the dashboard. He smiled, not wide, not loud, just enough to tell me he knew I had already lost the argument. Melissa picked up her suitcase. The wheels bumped over the icy sidewalk, a cheap rattling sound I still hear in quiet rooms sometimes. I did not chase her. I did not grab her arm. I did not beg in the snow. Something in me had gone still, the way a lake looks still right before it freezes solid. At the curb, she paused with one hand on the passenger door. I thought she might turn back. I thought maybe the baby would make her turn back. Instead, she said, "You will thank me someday. At least one of us is choosing a better life." Then she climbed in. The door shut with a soft, expensive thud. The Escalade pulled away slowly, tires whispering over fresh snow, red taillights shrinking past the corner until the street swallowed them. I stood there in my work jacket, holding a blanket for a child who had just been abandoned before she had even taken her first breath. Behind me, our Christmas tree blinked through the window, warm and useless. That was the night I learned a house can still have lights on and be completely empty. For a long time, I told myself the cruelest part was watching Melissa leave. It was not. The cruelest part came 2 mornings later, when I found the second envelope tucked behind the baby books on the shelf we had painted together. The first envelope had been for me. The second one was for a lawyer. I stood in the nursery with the space heater humming at my feet, surrounded by pale yellow walls, a half-built crib, and tiny clothes still clipped to plastic hangers. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up slow after Christmas, trash cans full of wrapping paper, kids testing sleds on driveways, fathers scraping ice from windshields before work. Inside that room, my hands opened documents that made the air disappear. Melissa had signed papers giving me primary responsibility for the baby after birth. Not because she trusted me. Not because she thought I would be a good father. The wording made it clean, almost polite. She was choosing to step away for the good of her future, with the option to revisit contact later if circumstances changed. Circumstances. That was the word that sat on the page like a stain. Not daughter. Not child. Not family. Circumstances. I read every line slowly because men like me learn early that panic does not pay bills and confusion does not change paperwork. There were forms, notes from an attorney, a suggested hospital plan, and a paragraph where she claimed our separation had been mutual in spirit for months. Mutual. I almost laughed, but the sound never made it out. I looked at the crib parts spread across the floor, the Allen wrench, the little bag of screws, the instruction booklet folded open to step 4. That crib had more honesty in it than my marriage did. At least when it was missing a piece, it admitted something could not hold yet. I sat down on the carpet and put the papers beside me. My phone had not stopped lighting up since she left. Her mother called first, then mine, then 2 people from church who used soft voices like I was already broken glass. Melissa sent one message the next afternoon. "Please do not make this ugly." That was all. Not "how are you?" Not "is the baby okay?" Not "I am sorry." Just a request for me to keep her exit comfortable. I typed a dozen replies and deleted every one. Anger wanted a stage. Fatherhood needed a plan. So I made one. I called an attorney from a billboard I had passed 100 times on I-71. I called the hospital and asked what paperwork a father needed to be present. I called my boss and asked for every overtime shift available. Then I drove to a discount store and bought diapers, wipes, bottles, a thermometer, and a paperback book called What to Expect the First Year, because nobody hands a man a manual when his life gets split open. The cashier asked if it was my first baby. I said yes. She smiled and told me congratulations. I thanked her, carried the bags to my truck, and sat in the parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel until the windows fogged. Congratulations. The word felt too bright for what was happening. But somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, beneath the image of that black Escalade turning the corner, something steady began to form. Melissa had looked at our child and seen an anchor. I looked at the same child and saw a promise. That night, I went back into the nursery, tightened every screw on the crib, washed the little white blanket with silver stars, and folded it over the rail. I did not know how to be a single father. I did not know how to heal. I did not know how I was going to afford formula, court fees, rent, and winter utilities all at once. But I knew this much. The baby was not a circumstance. She was my daughter. And whatever door Melissa had closed behind her, I was going to build a whole life on this side of it. Grace was born on a gray Monday morning in January, while Columbus sat under 6 inches of snow and the roads outside Riverside Methodist looked like strips of dirty glass. I had been awake for almost 30 hours by the time I heard her cry, but the sound cut through my exhaustion like a church bell. Small, furious, alive. The nurse placed her in my arms, wrapped in a hospital blanket with pink and blue stripes, and I remember thinking she weighed almost nothing and everything at the same time. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, dark eyes blinking under the lights, one tiny hand opening and closing against my shirt. I looked down at her and waited for some perfect sentence to come, something worthy of the moment, something a better man might say. Nothing came. So I whispered the only truth I had. I am here. Her birth certificate asked for names. I wrote Grace Evelyn Carter with hands that shook so badly the pen scratched the paper. Melissa was not in the room. She had signed what she needed to sign through lawyers and hospital staff, keeping herself clean from the mess of presents. There are empty chairs that shout louder than people ever could. The one beside my hospital bed shouted all day. My mother drove in from Dayton with a casserole, 2 bags of baby clothes, and eyes red from trying not to cry in front of me. She held Grace and said, "This child is loved." I nodded because if I spoke, I was afraid the wall inside me would crack. 3 days later, I brought my daughter home in a used car seat I had checked 5 times before leaving the parking lot. The house was cold, quiet, and waiting. I set the carrier in the nursery, turned on the lamp shaped like a moon, and stood there while Grace slept with her mouth slightly open, unaware that the world had already asked too much of her. The first months did not look like a movie. They looked like unpaid bills clipped to the refrigerator, formula coupons in a drawer, laundry piled over the back of a chair, and me learning how to warm bottles at 2:17 in the morning with one eye half open. They looked like me showing up to job sites with spit up on my sleeve and pretending nobody noticed. They looked like conference calls with Grace asleep against my chest, her tiny breath warming the collar of my work shirt. I changed diapers on a folding table in the laundry room. I read electrical code updates while rocking her with my foot. I learned the difference between a hungry cry, a tired cry, and the sharp little cry that meant her pacifier had fallen 2 inches from her face and ruined her entire evening. Some nights, after I finally got her down, I sat on the hallway floor outside her room because walking away felt impossible. The house still carried Melissa in strange places. A perfume bottle behind the bathroom mirror, a scarf in the coat closet, a chipped mug with gold letters that said future millionaire. I packed those things into a cardboard box one Saturday before sunrise and set it in the garage. Not because I was healed, because Grace deserved a home that did not feel haunted by someone who chose absence. I did not chase revenge. I chased stability. I took every overtime shift. I repaired panels after regular hours. I studied for my master electrician license at the kitchen table while Grace slept in a portable crib beside me. Coffee became a food group. Sleep became something I borrowed in 20-minute pieces. But every time I wanted to quit, I looked at that white blanket with silver stars folded over her crib rail and remembered the night Melissa called our daughter a circumstance without using the word out loud. Grace was not a burden. She was the line I refused to let life push me past. By her first birthday, I had passed my license exam. I held the certificate in one hand and Grace in the other, standing in that same little kitchen where Melissa had left her ring. There was no applause, no champagne, no dramatic music. Just my daughter smacking frosting on her high chair tray and laughing like the whole world had finally done something right. By the time Grace turned 2, my life had become a rhythm built out of necessity. Up at 5:15, coffee before the sun, lunch packed while cartoons whispered from the living room, daycare drop-off by 7, job site by 7:30, invoices after dinner, bedtime stories by 8, code books by 9, and silence somewhere close to midnight. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of struggle people put on social media with a soft filter and a brave caption. It was work boots by the back door, a checking account balanced down to the dollar, and a little girl who clapped every time I fixed something because she thought her father could repair the whole world with a screwdriver. I started Carter Electrical Solutions with one used van, a magnetic sign on the side, and 300 business cards I printed at an office supply store. The first week, I made less than I had at my old job. The second week, a restaurant owner on High Street called because his kitchen outlets kept tripping during breakfast rush. I fixed the panel, labeled everything clean, and charged him fair. 2 days later, he gave my number to his brother-in-law. That is how it grew. Not fast. Not easy. One honest job, then another. A breaker box in a ranch house. Parking lot lights behind a pharmacy. Emergency wiring at a dentist office on a Sunday morning while Grace colored unicorns on printer paper in the waiting room. People liked that I showed up when I said I would. They liked that I swept the floor after myself. They liked that I explained the problem without making them feel stupid. I did not realize then that reliability could become a kind of currency. Year 3 changed everything. A facilities manager from a small medical network called after midnight because one of their outpatient clinics had lost power to critical equipment during a winter storm. I left Grace with my mother, drove 40 miles through sleet, and worked until sunrise with numb fingers and a flashlight tucked under my chin. We got them running before the first patients arrived. The manager shook my hand in the parking lot while the sky turned pale and said, "You just saved me a disaster." 2 months later, he asked if my company could bid on maintenance contracts for 3 clinics. I said yes before fear could answer for me. Then I sat in my van and stared at the email until my coffee went cold. That contract did not make me rich overnight. Nothing honest does. But it gave me breathing room. I hired my first employee, a quiet guy named Marcus who had 2 kids and knew conduit like poetry. Then a second van. Then a bookkeeper who told me half my receipts looked like they had survived a flood. By Grace's 4th birthday, Carter Electrical Solutions had 6 employees, 3 service trucks, and a small office in a brick building near Westerville with a leaky roof. I eventually replaced myself. I bought a house that spring. Not a mansion. Not some glass palace Melissa would have posted online. A warm, white 2-story with blue shutters, a fenced backyard, and a maple tree that turned gold in October. The day I signed the papers, Grace ran through the empty rooms yelling to hear her echo. In the smallest bedroom, she spun in a circle and declared it her princess office. I laughed so hard I had to sit on the floor. Later, when she was asleep, I walked into the garage and opened the same cardboard box I had carried from the old house. Inside was the silver star blanket, the rocking horse ornament, and one photograph from before everything fell apart. I kept the blanket. I kept the ornament. I threw the photograph away. The past had taught me what it needed to teach me, but it no longer got a room in my home. That December, Grace and I decorated our first real Christmas tree in the new living room. She put the rocking horse ornament too low, right where the dog could have reached it if we owned one. I left it there anyway. Some things do not need to be perfect to be sacred. As I watched her place a paper angel on top with both hands trembling from concentration, I understood something I had not understood in all those lonely years. Melissa had not taken my future when she left. She had only removed herself from it. The first time I heard Brandon Whitmore's name again, Grace was 4.5, and I was standing in the break room at the office, eating leftover macaroni and cheese from a plastic container while my bookkeeper, Denise, read the local business news on her tablet. She made a sound through her nose, not quite a laugh, not quite surprise, and said, "Wasn't this the guy who used to be on all those real estate billboards?" I looked up because some names have a way of opening old drawers. On her screen was a photo of Brandon in a Navy suit, smiling the same showroom smile he had worn behind the wheel of that Escalade. The article said his development group had overextended on luxury condos, missed loan payments, and become part of a messy lawsuit involving investors who wanted answers and banks that wanted their money back. I did not celebrate. That surprised me. Years earlier, I thought hearing that man had fallen would feel like justice. Instead, it felt like watching a billboard peel in the rain. Loud once, useless now. Denise kept reading, but I had already gone quiet. I wondered where Melissa was, then hated myself a little for wondering. Some doors are closed, but the mind still checks the lock. Over the next few months, little pieces reached me through Columbus the way gossip does. Never invited, always familiar. A customer mentioned Brandon had sold his German car. A supplier said one of Brandon's downtown offices had gone dark. My attorney, during a routine custody update, told me Melissa had changed addresses twice in 1 year, both times using forwarding information that looked temporary. I said nothing, but that old cold feeling moved through my chest. Not love, not even anger. Recognition. I knew what instability smelled like. It smelled like unopened envelopes and pride pretending not to panic. Melissa had spent years chasing rooms with higher ceilings, tables with better wine, people who introduced themselves by title before name. She had wanted a life where money arrived polished, where men wore watches that cost more than my first van, where nobody had to clip coupons or wait for payday. For a while, I heard she had it. Photos found their way to me once, not because I searched, but because a mutual friend forgot that mercy sometimes means silence. Melissa on a rooftop patio in Nashville. Melissa beside a hotel pool in Miami. Melissa holding a champagne glass at a charity gala, smiling like the world had finally admitted she belonged. There was no sign of grace in any of those pictures. No birthday post. No Christmas card. No message asking what size shoes her daughter wore. That told me everything I needed to know. Then the shine came off. Brandon's lawsuit became public. His partners turned on him. The condo project stalled with empty windows staring over a muddy lot. The Escalade disappeared. The downtown apartment Melissa used to mention in court documents became a smaller place outside the outer belt, then a room in someone else's townhouse, then nothing steady enough to list. I learned later that Brandon had convinced her to sign for lines of credit, furniture leases, and a personal loan tied to a business that was never really hers. He did not leave all at once. Men like that rarely do. They fade by inches, first missing calls, then blaming stress, then needing space, then becoming a disconnected number when the bills start using both names. By the time Melissa understood what had happened, the life she chose over us had already been packed into storage units and past due notices. The strange thing about consequences is that they do not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes they arrive as a declined card at a grocery store. Sometimes as a landlord changing the lock code. Sometimes as a woman sitting in a borrowed car outside a house she once called a poor man's cage, realizing the man inside had turned it into the only warm place left in her memory. I opened the door because leaving Melissa in the snow would have taught Grace the wrong lesson about mercy, but I kept my body in the doorway because mercy and trust are not the same thing. The porch light fell across Melissa's face, showing every tired line that the doorbell camera had softened. She looked past my shoulder, trying to see into the living room, trying to catch a glimpse of the child she had turned into paperwork. I stepped slightly to the side, not enough to invite her in, just enough to remind her there was a house behind me now, a warm one, a stable one, the kind she once said I could never provide. "Daniel," she whispered, "I know I have no right to ask." That was the first true thing she had said all night. I waited. Snow collected on the top of her suitcase. The wheels were packed with dirty slush. She looked down at them like she had just realized how far she had dragged her pride to get here. "Brandon is gone," she said. "Everything is gone. The apartment, the car, the accounts. I made a terrible mistake. I did not ask for details. Men learn with age that some explanations are just excuses wearing better shoes." She pressed one hand over her chest, breathing fast, eyes shining. "I thought he was giving me a future. I thought you were holding me back." The words should have hurt, but they arrived late. 5 years late. They landed on a man who had already paid the bill, rebuilt the wall, and changed the locks inside himself. Behind me, Grace's little voice floated from the living room. "Daddy, is everything okay?" Melissa flinched at the sound. It was not the flinch of a mother hearing her child. It was the flinch of a woman realizing the story had continued without her. I turned my head and said, "Everything is okay, sweetheart. Stay by the tree." Then I looked back at Melissa. "Do not use that voice in front of her." She blinked. "What voice?" "The one that makes this about you." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, silence did the work. She hugged her coat tighter and said, "I want to see my daughter. My daughter." The words touched something sharp in me, but I kept my face calm. I had spent 5 years learning that calm is not weakness. Calm is a locked gate with lights on behind it. What was her first word? I asked. Melissa stared at me. Daniel, please. What was Grace's first word? The snow kept falling. Somewhere down the street, a car passed slowly, tires whispering through powder. Melissa swallowed. I was not there. What song made her stop crying when she had colic? Her eyes moved away from mine. I do not know. What is she allergic to? Nothing. What does she call the maple tree in the backyard? Her lips trembled. I said I made a mistake. I nodded once. You made a choice. Mistakes happen when someone grabs the wrong keys. Choices happen when someone signs papers, packs a suitcase, and leaves a child before she is born. Her tears came harder then, but tears do not rewrite calendars. She said she had changed. She said losing everything made her see what mattered. She said she missed the idea of Christmas morning, the sound of a child in the house, the chance to be a family again. That word almost made me close the door. Family. People use it like a blanket after they have spent years standing in the cold by choice. I took one slow breath and let the old pain pass through without picking it up. You can contact my attorney after New Year's, I said. If you want a petition for supervised visitation, we will handle it legally and carefully. Grace deserves protection, not surprises. Melissa looked at me like I had spoken another language. You are not going to let me in? I glanced back at the tree, at the paper angel, at the little girl sitting cross-legged on the rug with one pink slipper missing, trusting me to keep her world steady. Then I looked at the woman on my porch, the woman who had mistaken shelter for something she could abandon and return to whenever the weather changed. No, I said quietly. Not tonight. Melissa stood there for a few seconds after I said it, as if the word no had to travel a long distance before it reached the part of her that understood me. 5 years earlier, I would have explained myself until my throat hurt. I would have tried to prove I was not cruel, not bitter, not the villain in whatever version of the story she needed to tell. But that man had been left behind in a rented house with a cold Christmas tree and a blanket in his hands. The man standing at the door now had a daughter asleep to protect, a home to keep steady, and no interest in reopening a wound just because the person who made it finally felt cold. Melissa wiped her face and looked past me one last time. Please, she said. I just want to come home. The word home moved through me slowly. For years, I thought home was a place people chose together. Then I learned it can also be a place one person protects alone until it becomes safe again. This is Grace's home, I said. You do not get to use it as shelter from consequences. Her eyes dropped to the porch boards. I could see the old Melissa fighting to return, the one who knew how to turn sadness into pressure, guilt into leverage, silence into accusation. But she was too tired for performance, and I was too healed to audition for the role of fool again. I told her I would call a cab if she needed one. I told her there were hotels open near Polaris and shelters downtown if she truly had nowhere safe to stay. I told her again that my attorney's office would be the only way to discuss Grace. Each sentence was calm. Each sentence was a brick. She nodded, but not like she agreed. More like she had finally reached a door that would not become soft just because she cried on the other side. When the cab pulled up 20 minutes later, its headlights washed across the snow and made her suitcase look smaller than ever. She turned before stepping off the porch. Do you hate me? She asked. I thought about the hospital room, the empty chair, the first fever Grace ever had, when I held her upright all night because she could breathe easier against my shoulder. I thought about her first steps across the kitchen, her first day of preschool, the way she once called the moon a broken cookie. Melissa had missed all of it. Hate would have kept her in the center of those memories. She did not deserve that much space. No, I said. I just do not need you anymore. That answer hurt her more than anger would have. I saw it in the way her face changed, not dramatically, just enough for the truth to settle in. Then she walked down the steps, climbed into the cab, and disappeared into the falling snow without a grand ending, without music, without the universe stopping to watch. The street became quiet again. I closed the door and locked it, then stood with my palm flat against the wood until the cold left my fingers. From the living room, Grace called, Daddy, can we finish Santa's cookies? I turned and saw her sitting beside the tree with flour on her pajama sleeve, one slipper still missing, the paper angel leaning slightly to the left because that was how we had placed it together. I went to her and sat on the rug. She handed me a crooked sugar cookie shaped like a star. Was that lady sad? She asked. I looked toward the door, then back at my daughter. Yes, sweetheart. I think she was. Grace considered that with the serious face children use when they are trying to understand grown-up weather. Then she broke the cookie in half and gave me the bigger piece. Maybe Santa can help her, she said. I kissed the top of her head and felt something inside me finally loosen. Not forgiveness exactly. Something quieter. Something cleaner. At midnight, after Grace fell asleep on the couch, I carried her upstairs and tucked the Silver Star blanket over her feet. It was too small for her now, more memory than blanket, but she still loved it. Downstairs, the tree glowed in the window, and outside, snow covered the cab tracks until the street looked untouched. 5 years earlier, I thought Christmas had taken my family from me. I was wrong. My family had been placed in my arms in a hospital room, 6 pounds, 9 ounces, blinking under bright lights, waiting for me to become the man she needed. Melissa had left looking for a better life. I stayed and built one.